ExxonMobil has its investor day today, and investors are likely to have some pressing questions for the American oil major. Now, unlike its European rivals BP and Shell, Exxon has really hesitated to embrace a growing renewables market. But impatience for a strategy shift is growing among some investors. The oil price shock of the pandemic has only increased their calls for the major to diversify. Now, here's how bad the industry was hit last year. ExxonMobil lost $22 billion, and that after recording a $14 billion profit just a year earlier. Now, it wasn't alone. British oil champion BP posting a loss last year of over $20 billion. And if you look at Shell, turnover there collapsing by 50%, leaving that company with a pandemic-based loss of almost $22 billion. Now, Exxon plans to axe 15% of its workforce by the end of this year. That's probably somewhere around 10,000 jobs. It's also promising more change in its strategy, including recently bringing on an activist investor to its board, and it's promising other activist investor groups that it's going to do more in the future. Now, for more on this, I want to talk to Derek Conway. He's legal counsel for Climate Focus. That's an advisory group specializing in climate change. And Derek joins me from Amsterdam. Welcome to the show, first of all. Derek, Exxon has said that it believes that oil and gas are still viable in the decades ahead, especially as other big oil majors focus on renewables, that there's still area there for it to reap profit. Is there a business case that it's made?
Well, if we want to hit the climate targets that the world has agreed in the Paris Agreement, there really isn't. So we have very, very little space for more oil and gas. Research has shown that even if we exploit all the oil and gas that's in the fields currently in operation, we already overshoot our targets. So really, oil and gas is yesterday's business, and tomorrow's business is renewable energy, green hydrogen, and electric vehicles.
Now, Derek, to some extent, BP and Shell have embraced renewables a bit, and yet investors aren't really sold on them. So why is that?
Well, I think firstly, BP and Shell, they're taking baby steps towards renewables, but it's really only a side business so far. I mean, their main business is oil and gas. Now, they're gradually trying to step away, but even they're doing it too slowly. Now, unfortunately, the regulatory frameworks are in place are still favoring the incumbents. They're still favoring oil and gas. Governments around the world are continuing to subsidize fossil fuels to a massive extent. And certainly that's the case in the US, it's the case here in Europe, and it's the case in a lot of major oil-producing countries in the Middle East, China, and elsewhere.
All right, so the business case needs to be helped along by the government, you would say. To what extent, under a new administration in the U.S., is that possible? Do you see any steps by the Biden administration that you believe will help further that shift from oil majors?
Absolutely. I think the Biden administration has got off to a really positive start. I mean, they already announced they're going to stop giving new oil and gas leases on federal lands, on public lands, which is really positive. They also said they're going to talk about seeing if they can phase out the existing oil and gas leases on public lands. So these are really positive steps, but they really need to be implemented and very fast. So the Biden administration needs to move ahead with that. They also need to ensure that the alternatives are in place. Okay, so we do need energy, and there are plentiful renewable energy sources, but we need to have the regulatory frameworks in place. So the Biden administration needs to move quickly to scale up renewable energy, to scale up infrastructure for green hydrogen, mass electrification of vehicles. And at the same time, what's really important is that they focus on a just transition. So what that means is that there are going to be workers who are going to lose their jobs as we move towards a green economy. And those workers, there needs to be, first of all, a social safety net in place for when they do lose their jobs. But at the same time, those workers need to be retrained so they can find their place in the new low-carbon economy.
All right, a tough and likely expensive transition. Derek Conway with Climate Focus, thank you very much.